1939. Dang. Been a long time since Texas A&M has won a natty. We're going to preview and predict their record on today's video. Good morning. It's Uncle Lou here. That's right. It is me, Uncle Lou. Appreciate you watching. Hit the subscribe button if you're not already. I post pointless, barely watchable college football videos almost every single day of the year. I even do ridiculous call-in shows where I talk to y'all and all kinds of head-scratching, hair-raising college football type stuff that, like I said, makes little to no sense. Hit the subscribe button. Thank me later. Watching Uncle Lou will lower your cholesterol, get you off of that Lipitor you're taking, which is killing you from the inside out. But we are going to do a preview and a game-by-game prediction today of the Texas A&M Aggies. Now, I do a series of these videos every single offseason, and if you're just finding the channel for some reason, you're in luck because we've just started for this season. This is going to be just the third video we've done. I've done Miami, the Miami Hurricanes, and Nebraska, the Cornhuskers, and then today on to the Texas A&M Aggies. Big shout out to everybody over on the Patreon page, but especially Charles A., and I'm probably going to say this one wrong, Jyrion, I'm not sure, I'm sorry. They both suggested over on the Patreon page that I do a preview and game-by-game prediction for the Texas A&M Aggies, so here it be. This is it. I really appreciate the two of you helping to support the show and the channel over there on the Patreon page. If you'd like to join up on the Patreon page, there's a link in the description of this video. You'll see the prediction post over there. Just comment the team that you want me to do, and I'll do it for you. It's literally that simple. All right, here we go. Texas A&M. Out with the old, in with the new, right? Jimbo Fisher, gone. They paid him a king's ransom not to work. Just an absolute insane buyout, the $80 million. We're not going to rehash all that. We all know what happened with Jimbo Fisher. A lot of hype when he got there, coming off a natty at Florida State. Never really worked out. They were paying him $10, $12 million a year. Fired him early, owed him $80 million buyout. Boom. In comes Mike Elco from Duke. Now, Mike Elco has a previous stop at Texas A&M. He's a defensive coordinator there, so he's familiar with what goes on in College Station. He's familiar with, the booster scene and all the kinds of things that go into running a successful college football program at Texas A&M. He's not sort of an outsider. He knows what he's getting himself into there at Texas A&M. Let's recap last year real quick. 2023, Texas A&M went 7-6, a step back from the normal 8-4, or what has appeared to become the normal there at Texas A&M, 8-4, but they were 7-6, 7-5 in the regular season, 7-6 after a bowl loss to, I believe it was Oklahoma State in the Texas Bowl, finished up at 7-6. They were 4-4 in the SEC, which was good for fourth place in the SEC West. The SEC was still operating under divisions last year. That's no longer the case this year going forward. As you'll see when we pull the schedule up, schedules in the SEC have been completely turned upside down and on their head. Some teams got, kind of dealt a bad hand with a really difficult schedule. Other teams, not so much. Texas A&M, you'll see when we put their schedule up, but they got a pretty good roll of the dice when it comes to the schedule. They avoid 3 or 4 of the best 4 or 5 teams in the SEC, but we'll get to that here in a few minutes. So fourth in the SEC West last year, 7-5 in the regular season, 7-6 overall. They lost their last 2 games of the season, so they're currently on a 2-game losing streak. They lost their last game of the regular season, and then they lost their bowl game. They lost on the road at LSU and then lost to Oklahoma State. Their 6 losses last year, not really any terrible losses. There's 1 or 2 that you probably say, well, maybe if we play them again, we could get the win. But they lost on the road at Miami. They lost at home to Bama. They lost on the road at Tennessee. They lost on the road at Ole Miss, on the road at LSU, and then the bowl game to Oklahoma State. So when you take a look at those losses there's nothing super embarrassing, right? They're not Auburn getting beat by New Mexico State or anything like that. But the Miami loss, kind of hard to justify that. Looking back on it now, Miami ended up being a 6-loss team out in the ACC. Texas A&M, probably should win that game. But again, that's one of the many reasons why Jimbo Fisher is gone. So you drop that one. Losing to Bama, it sucks, but there's no shame in that. Losing on the road at Tennessee. Now, Tennessee took a step back from the year before. Tennessee lost 4 games last year, but playing there can be difficult. You did lose that one. You lost to Ole Miss, who had the best season they've had in a long, long time, going 10-2. So, again, Not that you should be happy about losing to Ole Miss, but they just were clearly a better team than Texas A&M last year, and you took the loss on the road there. You lost on the road at LSU. They weren't a great team, had a great offense, Heisman-winning quarterback, had no defense at all, but it didn't matter because, as you know, Texas A&M had no offense at all, so they couldn't take advantage of the fact that LSU had no defense. Then you have the bowl game loss to Oklahoma State, which, again, you can make of that what you will. In the age of college football we're in now, you know how fans are. If your team wins a bowl game, it's a big deal. If your team loses a bowl game, it didn't matter. So just take that however you want. Those are the teams you lost to. Let's talk about Mike Elko. An unbelievable job at Duke. There's really no other way to explain it. The only thing I can really compare, at least that I can think of in my head, to what Mike Elko did at Duke would be what James Franklin did at Vandy. Now, this was a long time ago, over a decade ago now, but James Franklin, once upon a time, was the head coach at Vandy and won like 9 games a couple of years there. And if you're any type of college football fan at all, you know how hard it is to win any games at all at Vandy. James Franklin was winning 8-9 games there, and then, of course, got the promotion over to Penn State. Similar situation with Mike Elko. He takes over a terrible Duke team and proceeds to win 9 games. It was really unbelievable. He went 9-4 and then 8-5. He was only there for 2 years. The 3 years before Mike Elko got there, Duke won 3 games, 2 games, and 5 games. So it's not like he stepped into a good situation. He didn't step into some sort of huge, talent-rich situation. This was Duke. This was a bad team coming off the end of the Cutcliffe years. Again, the 3 years before Elko got there, 3 wins, 2 wins, 5 wins. So the last year, the year before Elko got there, they won 3 games. Immediately in year 1, Elko takes them from 3 wins to 9 wins. Duke went 9-4 in Elko's first year at Duke. Last year, 8-5. Now he gets the call back to Texas A&M again, where he previously spent time as a defensive coordinator. So I think this is a good hire. He has proven that he can win games with subprime talent. I mean, Duke is not recruiting 4- and 5-star players. They're just not. Even in the age of the transfer portal, they're not bringing in home run hitters or 5-star kids out of the portal. Now they hit it with Riley Leonard. He ended up being a really good quarterback. But he's going to have more talent at Texas A&M immediately. The minute Mike Elko walked in the door at Texas A&M, that became the most talented team he'd ever been a head coach of, period. Again, you need more than talent to win games. But the point is, when you just look at Duke's roster, you look at Texas A&M roster, much better situation at Texas A&M in terms of overall talent. And he's proven he can win, winning 8 and 9 games in back-to-back years at Duke. Speaking of talent, let's take a look at Texas A&M's overall talent. Now, again, for all these numbers, we're going to look at talent index, recruiting rankings, and transfer class rankings, portal class rankings. Now, you can find rankings for these things a lot of different places. 24/7, On3, Rivals, ESPN, whoever. A lot of different people rank these things. I use 24/7, not because I think they're the best. It's just what I've always used. They've been around a long time. It's just out of habit. I always go to 24/7 to look those things up. And in an effort to be consistent when I'm talking about teams, I always use 24/7. I don't want to use 24/7 when I'm talking about Miami or Nebraska's recruiting rankings yesterday or the day before. And then today, when I get ready to talk about Texas A&M, use a different service. So just to stay consistent, these numbers all come from 24/7. Again, you're welcome to look other places for numbers. I'm not here to tell you 24/7 is the best. It's just what I use. Total talent, top to bottom, team roster. Last year, Texas A&M had the 4th most talented roster in the country. And again, that's why Jimbo Fisher is no longer there, right? Jimbo Fisher's not necessarily fired because he was winning 7 or 8 games a year. Yeah, that is unacceptable at Texas A&M, and he should have been doing better, but he was fired because he was winning 7 or 8 games a year at Texas A&M with top 10 talent. He had top 10 talent and can't finish the season ranked. I mean, that's why he's gone. So it shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody that Texas A&M is an extremely talented team from a roster standpoint. Now, that doesn't mean that they have all the players they need and all the right position groups. What happens a lot of times, particularly with Texas A&M, and it's happened with some other teams. In fact, it was happening to Texas 3, 4, 5 years ago. It's one thing to have a lot of talent, but if it's all sort of globbed together in the same areas, it's not really doing you any good. In other words, let's say you have 9 5-star wide receivers. Well, that's great. Your overall talent is going to be really high when you factor that in. But if you've got 9 5-star wide receivers and not a single offensive lineman that can block anybody, like, does that really matter? You have to spread the talent around. Texas figured that out under Sarkisian, and they sort of started to spread that talent around, and we all saw what they did last year. Texas A&M needs to get to that point. It's one thing to have a bunch of talented players. You got to have the right puzzle pieces to fit that all together. But with that being said, Mike Elco will be coaching the most talented team, top to bottom, he's ever been a part of. Again, according to 24/7, they were the 4th most talented team in the country last season. 24/7 has not put out their talent rankings for 2024 yet. They usually wait as late as they can to do it because of transfers and things like that. But Texas A&M will be one of the top 10 most talented teams in the country in 2024, just top to bottom roster-wise talent rankings. Let's take a look at the recruiting classes under Texas A&M. Now, everybody likes to talk about the class from 3 years ago, but we're going to start with the most recent class. The 2024 class was 19th. So kind of a Mike Elco class, kind of a Jimbo Fisher class, right? Because Jimbo Fisher was fired at the end of the 2023 season. Well, most of that 24 recruiting cycle is in place. Jimbo gets fired. Elco has to come in and kind of try to hold it together and add a piece here and there. Ended up with a top 20 class coming in at 19th. The year before that, 15th. And then, of course, 2 seasons ago was that massive #1 class that they had, what some people call the best recruiting class in the history of college football, at least from a numbers standpoint. Now, again, we have to understand we're in the age of the transfer portal. And yes, a lot of these players that came from that first-ranked class, the 15 class, a lot of those players have transferred out. That is true. But they've done a really good job of bringing players in as well. When you look at the portal rankings under Texas A&M, they took a massive step forward in the transfer rankings this season under Mike Elco versus what Jimbo Fisher was using the portal for in the years prior. Texas A&M finished, or is currently, because I guess really we're not finished. You could still add a transfer now if you wanted to. But as of today, Texas A&M has the 4th best portal class in the country for 2024. So yeah, they've lost a lot of talent. But Mike Elco and company have done a good job of bringing some talent in to try to help replace that. If you look at what Jimbo did his last 2 years at Texas A&M in terms of transfer classes, it was 26th and 107th. So clearly Mike Elco putting a bigger emphasis on bringing in transfers than what Jimbo Fisher was. Now, some of that is just a numbers game. You know, they had a ton of players transfer out. And the only way to backfill that in today's college football, once signing day comes and goes, is to backfill that with transfer portal players. So Mike Elco really had no choice but to bring in a bunch of portal players. So I'm not really throwing Jimbo under the bus there or praising Mike Elco there. He kind of did the only thing he had the option to do. No matter how you break these numbers down, no matter what you think about these numbers, I think we all have to agree that Texas A&M is going to have, again, one of the 10 most talented rosters in the country. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to win a single game. Right? The puzzle pieces have to fit together. You got to have a quarterback that can stay healthy, in particularly at Texas A&M, which has been a problem. And you got to win the games you're supposed to win without losing games you're not supposed to lose. And maybe you need an upset or two to go your way. But they're a very talented team. I think everyone can agree on that. Returning production. What does Texas A&M have coming back from last year that could potentially help them this year? Well, they return a lot of production. They're actually 18th in the country in terms of returning production at 72% overall. 77% of their offensive production returns and 67% of their defensive production returns. So a few more holes to fill on the defensive side of the ball as opposed to the offense for Mike Elco and company, but that shouldn't be a problem knowing that Mike Elco himself is a defensive coach, having been the defensive coordinator at Texas A&M prior to taking the job at Duke. What does Vegas think about Texas A&M this year? The good people out in the desert. Now, again, this doesn't set anything in stone. These numbers I'm about to go over here, these Vegas odds, these win totals and odds to win the SEC and that just gives you an idea about what the Vegas people think about Texas A&M, what people who are willing to bet money sort of think about one particular team or another. So you take a look at Texas A&M, and their win total is currently sitting at 8.5. Now, keep in mind, this is a betting number, so obviously you can't win 8.5 games. This number is set with the intention for people to bet on either side of it, okay? So 8.5, what that means is you think Texas A&M is going to win more than 8.5 games. In other words, if you think they're going 9-3, 10-2, 11-1, or 12-0, that would be more than 8.5 wins. you would bet over 8.5 on Texas A&M. Vegas win total 8.5 for Texas A&M. You think they're going to win less? 7-5, 6-6, 5-7, whatever. You would bet under the 8.5. You'd bet the under. But the Vegas expected win total for Texas A&M currently sits at 8.5. National title hopes for Texas A&M. Let's be real. I don't think there's a person watching, or honestly a person on the planet, that thinks Texas A&M has a realistic shot of winning the national title this year. But if you're one of these people who's easily separated from their money and you want to bet on it, you can. They actually have the 15th best odds in the country to win the national title. Now, the problem is only 12 teams make the playoffs, but we'll talk about that in a second. But they got the 15th best odds of winning a natty at plus 4,500. That puts them in the same range as teams like Clemson and Miami, just to give you a general idea of where that plus 4,500 ranks them in terms of national title odds. What about their odds just to make the playoffs? Expanded to 12 teams this year, so we're going to get a lot more teams into the playoffs than what we're used to getting. Plus 220 to get into the playoffs, so not bad there. Odds plus 220 to get into the playoffs. That puts them again in the same category as teams like Kansas State, Missouri, and Miami. Those teams also have odds around the 220 plus 220 range. Can they win the SEC? No, they can't. But they've got the 8th best odds at plus 1,800. That puts them right behind Missouri. And of course, you can name Georgia, Bama, Texas, Ole Miss, Tennessee. Those are the teams ahead of Missouri and Texas A&M in terms of odds to win the SEC. All right. What do I think about Texas A&M? Sort of just my overall thoughts about the team heading into this season before we put the schedule up over here, actually, and go through it game by game. Coaching-wise, I love this hire of Mike Elco. Jimbo Fisher may or may not be a good coach, okay? Let's just set that aside for a second. My opinion is pretty well known. I don't think he's a very good coach. You have to fit where you're at too, right? You can't, it's not good enough just to be a good coach. It's got to be a good fit, and his wasn't. He was a little bit too hard-headed. He sort of refused to hire an offensive coordinator till it was way too late. He runs an outdated, antiquated style of offense that he refused to move on from. A lot of issues there with Jimbo Fisher. You run him out, you bring Mike Elco in. Will Mike Elco end up being a better or a worse coach than Jimbo Fisher? I don't know, but I think this is the right move at the right time for Texas A&M. I think he gives them a little bit of what they need. So just a totally different top-down approach to everything that's going on there. I really like the hire of Mike Elco and the offensive coordinators. Is it Colin Klein? I'm drawing a blank on the name maybe. But I like the offensive coordinator hire in particular. Obviously, your coordinator hires are two of your most important hires as a head coach. But particularly the coordinator that runs the opposite side of the ball that you deal with as a head coach. So in Mike Elco's case, he's a defensive coach. So I'm not saying his defensive coordinator hire doesn't matter. Of course it matters. But I think his offensive coordinator hire becomes really, really important. Same thing with like Kirby Smart at Georgia, right? It almost doesn't matter to me who Georgia or who Kirby hires as defensive coordinator, because don't we kind of know Kirby's going to have a pretty good defense? Yeah, I feel that way about Mike Elco as well. But you got to have a good offensive coordinator to sort of fill in that gap. And I like the way Elco has done that at Texas A&M with Klein. Offensively and defensively. On offense, it sounds kind of basic. They got to keep the quarterback healthy. This is a problem that has plagued Texas A&M for several years. But Connor Wegman is back. I assume he's going to be the starting quarterback. It's hard to find a coach right now that's going to tell you who their starting quarterback will be. They don't, this whole thing, everything's got to be a government secret when it comes to the world of college football. It's probably going to be Connor Wegman. He was able to come back and play a little bit in the spring game. He suffered an injury last year, which again seems to be a theme for Texas A&M players. But he suffered an injury at the end of last year that kept him out. He was able to come back and play a little bit in the spring. Didn't look great in their spring game. The numbers weren't all that impressive, but they were without like their top 4 wide receivers. They just had a whole bunch of people missing from. I'm not making excuses for him. I'm just laying out the facts. I think Connor Wegman will end up being the starting quarterback for Texas A&M. Now, I like their wide receiver situation. Now, none of them had all that great of numbers because just the quarterback situation was a mess the last few years with injuries and things. But, you have Thomas and Muhammad out there at wide receiver. I think both of them could be really, really good. And over on the defense, absolutely stacked with talent at all 3 levels. Now, they did lose some key pieces to the transfer portal. That defensive tackle transferred out, and they don't have a replacement for him. There's not a replacement for him. He's one of the best 3 or 4 defensive tackles in all of football. Walter Nolan, I'm talking about. But they've got a lot of talent on the defensive side of the ball. So, but again, like I mentioned earlier, talent is not really the issue or the question I have about Texas A&M. Texas A&M to me is like a puzzle, and they've had a lot of important pieces and some really good pieces, but they've also been missing some key pieces. Can they fit that puzzle together under Mike Elco? I think they probably can. In the long run, I don't know that it will happen this year, at least not in terms of winning the SEC or making the playoffs. That's sort of my overall opinion on Texas A&M. Let's put the schedule up on the screen. We're going to go through it game by game. I'll give you a winner and a loser for every single week. All right, first things I notice when I look at this schedule here is just an absolutely brutal non-con opener against a top 10 Notre Dame team. Now, people love to shit on Notre Dame. They also love to shit on Texas A&M, though, so I'll be curious to see which team gets shit on more by the internet heading into this game. I just don't understand how anybody can look at Notre Dame and Texas A&M and not think that Notre Dame should win this game. They're year 3 now in a new coach, whereas Texas A&M is starting over. Notre Dame has finished in the top 15 last year, top 20 the year before. Texas A&M hasn't sniffed the top 25. Other than this game being at Texas A&M, I don't see really any advantages for Texas A&M, but that is an interesting game. Road game early in the season at Florida. Mike Elko's first SEC road game. How do they handle that, right? The neutral site game against Arkansas, I hate that. The end of the season, they get Auburn and Texas in back-to-back weeks, and they get Auburn the week before Auburn plays Alabama. So maybe you try to catch Auburn sleeping there. But look who they don't play. To me, that's what stands out about this schedule. Who don't you see on here? Think about the top teams in the SEC heading into next year. Georgia, not on here. Alabama, not on here. Ole Miss, not on here. Tennessee, not on here. Now, they do play Texas, and they play Texas and Missouri. So they only play 2 of the top 6 teams in the SEC. And when I say top 6, I'm talking, if you look at any ranking, right, there's 6 teams ranked in the top 15 in the SEC. Georgia, Bama, Texas, Ole Miss, Tennessee, Missouri. They only play 2 of those. They play Missouri in the first half of the season at home. They play Texas in the second half of the season at home. This is a very favorable schedule. Very favorable schedule. No schedules in the SEC are easy this year, I don't think. But this is nowhere near the top of the list in terms of most difficult. It's closer to the bottom of the list in terms of one of the least difficult. There's 4 games on here that I see that I don't even have to think about at all. McNeese, win. Bowling Green, win. On the road at Mississippi State, win. I think Mississippi State is the worst team in the league. I think they're really going to have a rough year. And New Mexico State, win. I know. New Mexico State went into Auburn last year with a first-year head coach there and beat them. Why can't they do the same thing again this year to Texas A&M? Well, maybe they do. But there's just no way anybody on planet Earth can predict that, and I'm definitely not going to do it. So I think those are as close to guaranteed wins as you're going to get. McNeese, Bowling Green, Mississippi State, and New Mexico State. So I'll give you a win in those 4. Now let's start at the top and work our way down. Notre Dame, loss. I just can't see Mike Elko, year 1, Texas A&M, so much new going on there. I can't see them pulling off a win at home against Notre Dame. Now, this is going to be a crazy environment. 110,000 people there the first week of the season. They're optimistic. Their glass is half full. They've got rid of Jimbo. They've brought Mike Elko back home where he belongs in their mind. And everybody is undefeated entering week 1, right? So this will be one of the best home environments of the year for Texas A&M. And I just don't think it'll be enough. I think Notre Dame gets the job done. This is interesting because Riley Leonard, the quarterback for Mike Elko last year at Duke, has transferred to Notre Dame and is expected to get the start there against Mike Elko in week 1 on the road at Texas A&M. But Riley Leonard played really good last year in some really big games. You go back and watch the Clemson game, week 1 last year. He's basically single-handedly won that game for Duke against Clemson last year. Anyway, I think this will be a good game. Would I be shocked if Texas A&M pulled off what I would consider to be an upset here? No, I wouldn't be shocked. But at this point, I've got to go with Notre Dame. Texas A&M, unfortunately, starts the Mike Elko era 0-1. Already told you, I think you beat McNeese State. On the road at Florida, unfortunately, I think they lose this one too. I don't think Florida's a good team. If you've watched this channel for any amount of time, that doesn't come as a surprise. And I don't think Billy Napier knows what the hell he's doing. And I think Mike Elko could coach circles around Billy Napier. But the one thing Billy Napier has done right in his time at Florida, if there's anything he's done right, That one thing is to win one game early in the season that nobody expects them to win. Now, they play Miami week 1. So, like Texas A&M, they will have already had a big matchup, right, early in the year. I think Florida loses that game to Miami. So, I think Florida and Texas A&M both already have one loss coming into this game. It's possible Florida could have 2 losses, but I don't think that'll happen either. I think both of these teams are going to have one loss coming into this game. I think it's going to be a must-win game for Billy Napier in terms of keeping his job, because you look at Florida's schedule, the back half of it is just absolutely brutal and unwinnable. For Mike Elco, he will have lost to Notre Dame, in my opinion, gotten a win against McNeese State that no one cares about, and then the fan base is going to be hungry for a win that matters here on the road at Florida. And I think this is that game this year that Florida wins, that people, then at the end of the year, you're going to look back and you go, how the hell did Florida beat Texas A&M? I think that's this game. You look last year, right? What was that game last year? Tennessee in, I believe, week 4. What was that game 2 years ago? Utah in week 1 or 2. You look back at the end of the year 2 years ago, where was Utah? They were busy winning the Pac-12, beating Southern Cal and finishing like 11-2 or something, right? And Florida was busy finishing with 4 or 5 wins, but they beat Utah early in the year. You look at last year, Tennessee comes into Gainesville. What happens? They lost. And both of those wins, by the way, happened in Gainesville. Florida beat Utah early in the year in Gainesville. They beat Tennessee early in the year in Gainesville. I think they beat Texas A&M early in the year in Gainesville. Will it be enough to save Sunbelt Billy's job, though? No, it won't. Don't worry. I already told you, I think you beat Bowling Green. Then you play a pointless neutral site game for no reason at all against Arkansas, and I think you'll beat them. Arkansas is starting over, too. They've got a quarterback that some people are trying to hype up as the next Cam Newton. I've got to see it to believe it. Maybe he ends up being pretty good, but they've had a pretty good quarterback in KJ Jefferson, and how's that worked out? Well, it hasn't worked out. I think Texas A&M gets a win against Arkansas. I also think Texas A&M beats Missouri. I think it's possible Texas A&M is the kind of team that's going to get better as the year goes along if they can avoid injuries to key position groups, primarily quarterback and offensive line. But I think they have the potential to get back, first-year team, learning the playbook early in the year, getting comfortable with the coaching staff and the sort of the coaching style that's there. I think you could see Texas A&M be kind of a team that starts to pick up a little bit of steam. I do think Missouri's a good team. Brady Cook's a hell of a quarterback. Luther Burden's one of the best wide receivers in all of college football. They did lose that running back, and they lost their defense. That's actually what worries me the most about Missouri is what they lost on defense. But I think Texas A&M gets what will be a big win here for Mike Elko against a top 15 Missouri team. Again, at home. They're lucky to get some of these bigger games at home. Then you have a bye week. Come out of your bye week on the road at Mississippi State. Again, I already told you, I think you win that one. Come back home. You play LSU. I think they catch you here. LSU is going to be an interesting team this year. Their defense is going to have to get a lot better because their offense is coming back to earth a little this year. Not that I think their offense will be terrible. I actually like Nussmeier. I think he's a pretty good thrower of the football. In fact, just from a pure ability to throw the football, he might be a little bit better than Jaden Daniels. But he doesn't give you all the athleticism and the running around that Jaden Daniels does. And I'm not trying to pretend that he is as good overall as Jaden Daniels or is going to win the Heisman or anything. But so I think LSU takes a couple of steps backwards offensively, which means they're going to have to get a whole lot better on the defensive side of the ball. Last year's probably the worst LSU defense I've seen in my lifetime, at least this century, last 20 or 25 years. That defense was horrendous. And honestly, there's not a lot of indications that it's going to be much better this coming year. They pretty much struck out in the transfer portal. The secondary might end up being bad again. They've got no depth along the defensive lines. Hell, maybe you beat LSU. I might be wrong here. Hell, you might beat LSU, but I've got it down as a loss. I'm gonna, I guess, not change my mind here in the middle of the video, even though I've almost talked myself into it. I think you lose a very close game to LSU, a 50-50 game that could go any way. Either way, I'm going to give LSU the nod, though. You go on the road at Williams-Brice. I think Texas A&M will win this one. Now, Texas A&M's been pretty bad for the last 10 years, but the one thing you can count on, beating South Carolina every single year. They've played every year for like the last 10 or 11 years, and South Carolina's only beat them once. South Carolina's another program that's kind of starting over in the quarterback deal. Very disappointing season last year. I'm not very high on South Carolina. Now, this is a tough place to play, but again, Texas A&M is going to have a lot of players who have played here before. I think they get the win. I think Texas A&M beats South Carolina on the road. Then you get your second bye week. You come out of that. New Mexico State, already told you, think get the win there. And then the Auburn game, this is important. Now, this is a big game for both teams here, Auburn and Texas A&M. Both these teams, it's possible, could be fighting for bowl eligibility at this point in the season. Now, clearly, you can see by my prediction here that I think Texas A&M will already be bowl eligible with wins against McNeese, Bowling Green, Arkansas, Missouri, Mississippi State, and South Carolina. That's 7 wins. You only need 6 for bowl eligibility. But I'm not always 100% right on these predictions, so maybe they lose a couple more games than I thought. Anyway, it's possible that both of these teams could be sitting on or around 5 wins when this game is played, which would be huge. This is the week before the Iron Bowl. Hard for me to imagine Auburn being up enough for this game. Now, it is at home. Again, another tough place to play here, especially late in the year. But I think you get the win on the road at Auburn. I like Hugh Freeze. Well, I don't like Hugh Freeze at all as a person, but as a college football coach, he knows what he's doing. And he can put a really good offense on the field. We've seen him do it at Ole Miss. But he's got to have his quarterback, and I just don't think they've got that yet at Auburn. I think they're still going with Robbie Ashford, and that guy just doesn't know what the hell he's doing. So I think Texas A&M goes on the road, gets a big win at Auburn. Unfortunately, I think you lose the first one to Texas. This is a huge game. I already made a video. To me, this is the best game of the college football season, Texas A&M versus Texas. I loved watching this game every Thanksgiving weekend as a kid. It was one of my favorite. It was almost like a holiday tradition. I would watch Texas and Texas A&M play. I absolutely hate that we lost that game for the better part of the last 15 years, and I couldn't be more excited that we're getting it back. And I made a video about this about a month or so ago. To me, this is the best game of the season for that reason, Texas and Texas A&M. I just think Texas is a few steps ahead of Texas A&M right now. They've got coaching consistency. They've got a returning Heisman caliber quarterback. Now, they did lose a lot, particularly at wide receiver and some on the defense that they've got to replace, but they've recruited, outside of that 1 year where Texas, that's the thing about Texas A&M. They had that one pop year where they signed the number 1 rated class, but every other year's kind of in the teens a little. 10 to 20-ish range. Texas has been consistently recruiting within the top 5, 6, or 7 for a while. I just feel like in every key category, Texas is a couple of steps further down the road than what Texas A&M is. Now, does that mean there's no way Texas A&M can win? No, this is going to be one of the most emotional games probably ever, because this is a bitter rivalry that was played every year for a long time and then got taken away. And, fingers pointed, it's your fault. No, it's your fault. Well, we said we'd play them. They don't want to play us. No, we said we'd play them. They said they didn't want to play us. Just a big mess the last 10 years. The important thing is that us as college football fans are getting this game back. That's the important thing. But I think Texas does get the win here in the first year of this renewed rivalry against Texas A&M. So that leaves you with 1, 2, 3, 4 losses. Is that it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's what it looks like. 8-4. Back to Texas 8-4, I guess. Texas A&M 8-4 according to Uncle Lou. Again, the Vegas total was 8.5. So I've got them coming up just short of the Vegas number at 8.5. I could be wrong. I've been wrong before. Back in 2019, for those of you who are around then, you might find this hard to believe, but I picked Georgia to beat South Carolina back in 2019. Yeah. And it didn't happen. So I've been wrong before. But I'm excited for Texas A&M this year, if for no other reason. I get to watch that Texas A&M Texas game at the end of the year. But I do appreciate everybody watching. Be sure and let me know down below where you think I'm wrong and how stupid I am. And have a good morning.